Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. So I wanted to make a brief video recording. I just sent you your first two assignments. One is the 7Cs analysis. So essentially what you're doing is going over to the New York Times or Washington Post business section or finding an article on the Harvard Business Review, and you're applying the 7Cs analysis to that. Pause this real quick here. So, shockingly, I do not have the 7Cs memorized, unfortunately. So this is straight out of chapter 2 in your textbook. Essentially what I wanted to do is break ground on this and kind of introduce the concept, have you apply it, and then we're going to go back through chapter 2 again, just so that we know this thoroughly. So the idea is we talk about good writing, we talk about flow. Everyone has different adjectives and descriptions of good writing. And so what I like about the 7Cs is that you have essentially a rubric to apply to anything you're examining, right? At least in the world of business and professional writing. So the first C is clear. So you're trying to avoid jargon and use active verbs where possible. The second C is concise. So here you're trying to avoid redundant turns of phrases, sentences that don't contribute much, if anything, to the overall piece. You're trying to avoid prepositions, what the book calls word salads, so prepositional strings that contribute a lot of words without saying a lot. You're also here trying to avoid nominalizations of words. And we'll get more on that when we actually go through chapter 2. I want to go through some examples. Concrete and specific. So here you have essentially descriptive language, meaning sensate language or language that appeals to the senses. Okay. And by way of trying to immerse ourselves in great examples of descriptive language, we're reading poems from The Art of the Lathe, okay? So one part of the poem close read, the middle part is just what turns of phrases, what lines, what descriptions sing out to you, all right? So where do you see descriptive language being used? So why use descriptive language in your narratives? Well, that's one way of appealing to your audience, right? Immersing your audience in that narrative. Complete, have you answered all the pertinent questions? Do you have all the pertinent info? When we get to news releases, for example, we'll examine the journalistic opening. So trying to answer the questions, who, what, where, when, and why, as you open a piece so that you're front loading that information for your reader. The 1, 2, 3, 4. Fifth C is courteous. Are you being friendly to your reader? So here again, every piece that you're writing, you're writing with the audience in mind, right? So are you being reader friendly? And this can mean a variety of things. This can mean just like the first C, are you avoiding jargon? But here more specifically, you might think about complex ideas that are offered up to your reader. If they're there, have you attempted to sort of quote unquote translate them for your reader? Have you unpacked them and explained them in an easy to use fashion? So one example might be from the world of physics, for example, physics and astronomy. I know little to nothing, but I'm fond of reading articles and new discoveries. And what I've noticed from many of those writers, what they're having to do is take a complex idea, and essentially they're trying to translate it so that the everyday reader can understand it, right? So how do galaxies rotate? Well, you think about a wagon wheel, for example, or a record. So quite often they're using figurative, and I'm not saying galaxies actually rotate like that. I don't really know, but what they're trying to do is use figurative language or use analogies, right? So A is like B, B being this everyday type of idea or object that we can understand, right? Rather than, you know, a jargon heavy paragraph on what dark matter is, etc. Okay, so the fifth C is courteous. The sixth C is coherent. So here, what we're trying to do is ensure that your piece is readable, right? So are you using sentences that err on the shorter side, right? Much as I love Faulkner, for example, who writes these beautiful paragraph-long sentences, Cormac McCarthy, Virginia Woolf, some of my very favorite writers. In the business professional world, we're trying to trim that down, right? We're trying to keep each sentence to just one idea, all right? In terms of paragraph structure, you are still thinking about the idea using the topic sentence, all right? So does your first sentence, does it announce the paragraph's intentions? Do the sentences that follow make sense thematically or in terms of idea, right? Is there progression, but is there some sense of a coherent paragraph structure? In between paragraphs, or sometimes even in between sentences, are you using transitions, right? And what could be since the 8C is correct grammar, old joke, sorry. The 9th C might be constructive diction, right? So constructive diction is using words from the previous paragraph or sentence in your new paragraph. So if we're talking about, I don't know, we use the astronomy thing again. If we're talking about dark matter, if the next paragraph is on what we don't know, then your first sentence, if your previous sentence was on what we've discovered about dark matter, despite all that has been discovered about dark matter in the past decade, many questions or characteristics remain, right? So trying to use constructive diction to manage that transition and make that more readable, more coherent. And then the final C is constructive. Essentially, this is trying to avoid negativity where possible and emphasizing positivity. All right, and we'll see much of this in the language of customer complaints, for example, especially when we get to our letter suites. So your task in the 7 C's is to choose an article. All right, Wash Post Business, New York Times Business, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, and essentially go C by C, grade this article. But the most important part, rather than the grade, is why you gave it the grade. So describe why you gave it the grade, and then for each C, bring in an example from the text, from the original text. All right, so each C needs a specific example from the text. That's what I'm grading on. In terms of your narrative suite, you have a few articles to read. All of those are in the assignment. Essentially what you're doing is, in response to the 5 prompts from the one MBA article, you are writing a paragraph or two response, essentially a narrative that answers that, right? So we're using The Art of the Lathe by B.H. Fairchild, 1, for the power of its descriptive language. I mean, 2, they're also beautiful, moving poems for what that's worth. And, you know, part of your education should be reading pieces like that. But 1, being able to see examples of powerful descriptive passages, so language used to answer one of our C's, are concrete and specific, and 2, to see narratives at work, right? So what he's doing with the speaker, what he's doing with the setting. Many of these are populated, by the way, by characters, right? They're people that he knew. They might be the real people They might be based on someone he knows, right? And so we're seeing narrative here, right? And now we're turning our attention and taking from the world of art and using this to professionalize you, right? To increase your linguistic ability, one, your ability with language, and two, to professionalize you by having these essays ready to go. So you don't have to write these essays and gear them to the world of the MBA, all right? In the past, I've had majors in, chemistry, biology, every STEM, engineering, some math students, and they all geared their essays to graduate programs that they were thinking about applying. You don't actually have to apply, but this is something, it's breaking ground to a possible future. All right, so that's the idea with the narrative suite. The poem Close Read, since we were meeting asynchronously and trying to break up into small groups that will meet every other week or so, what we're trying to do is have each of you carefully read a poem and offer it up and analyze it for your classmates. So I'm going to share my screen real quick, and we'll read a poem together. So this is Girl Writing a Letter by William Carpenter, and on the mouse here you can see this girl writing a letter. Now in terms of actual details from the poem, at one point we'll hear a harpsichord being played, and I've always wondered where the harpsichord is. I don't see it. And there's another painting in behind that has additional significance if you're Vermeer or studying Vermeer. That's beyond our scope for today. I'm just interested, but there is the black and white checked floor that will turn up in a minute. Okay, so this is Girl Writing a Letter by a poet named William Carpenter. A thief drives to the museum in his black van. The night watchman says, "Sorry, closed, you have to come back tomorrow." The thief sticks the point of his knife in the guard's ear. "I haven't got all evening," he says. "I need some art." "Art is for pleasure," the guard says, "not possession. You can't something." And then the duct tape is going across his mouth. "Don't worry," the thief says. "We're both on the same side." He finds the Dutch masters and goes right for a Vermeer. Girl writing a letter. The thief knows what he's doing. He has a PhD. He slices the canvas on one edge from the shelf holding the salad bowls right down to the square of sunlight on the black and white checked floor. The girl doesn't hear this. She's too absorbed in writing her letter. She doesn't notice him until it's too late. He's in the picture. He's already seated at the harpsichord. He's playing the G minor sonata by Domenico Scarlatti, which once made her heart beat till it passed the harpsichord and raced ahead and waited for the music to catch up. She's worked in this letter for 320 years. Now a man's here, and though he's dressed in some weird clothes, he's playing the harpsichord for her. For her alone, there's no one else alive in the museum. The man she was writing to is dead. Time to stop thinking about him. The artist who painted her is dead. She should be dead herself, only she has an ear for music and a heart that's running up the staircase of the Gardner Museum with a man she's only known for a few minutes, but it's true, it feels like her whole life. So when the thief hands her the knife and says, "You slice the paintings out of their frames, you roll them up," she does it. When he says, "You put another strip of duct tape over the guard's mouth so he'll stop talking about aesthetics," she tapes him. And when the thief puts her behind the wheel and says, "Drive, baby, the night is ours," it is the girl writing a letter who steers the black van onto the westbound ramp for Storrow Drive and then to the Mass Pike. It's the girl writing a letter who drives 80 miles an hour headed west into a country that's not even discovered yet, with a known criminal, a van full of old masters, and nowhere to go but down. But for the girl writing a letter, these things don't matter. She's got a beer in her free hand. She's on the road. She's real, and she's in love. Okay, so in the instructions within the assignment, I'm basically having you do 3 parts, no longer than a page. Okay, this is just meant to have you dwell in a poem for a little while and take note of the descriptive language, and begin to be able to close read a piece of literary text, which I think is a valuable skill in itself. Okay, so the first thing I ask you to do is basically a summary of the poem. So when I say summary, what has happened in the poem? So every poem I've assigned is a narrative poem, in that there is at least a hint of a story in the poem. So what is the story? Many of these people are people that Pete knows, Pete being B.H. Fairchild. He was a professor of mine back a while ago. So for this poem, I mean, this is fairly straightforward, right? A thief shows up at a museum and steals a bunch of paintings, fairly straightforward. As he's doing so, however, he stops at a Vermeer. He then climbs into this Vermeer painting and starts playing a harpsichord for a woman who is writing a letter in the painting. Now, this song seems to work, seems to do something for her. Maybe it's his adventurous spirit showing up out of the blue, but this does something to the woman writing a letter, and now she has a choice to make, and she chooses to go with this thief to help him rob this museum, and she takes off in his black van and out onto the highway with nowhere to go but down. So that's essentially I mean, that's what I'm after, right? A brief summary of the narrative. The second part is, I think, kind of the heart of this assignment. So where do you find descriptive passages? Where do you find surprises? So for me, one of the surprises is this line here: the thief sticks the point of his knife in the guard's ear. It's not just that the thief pulls a knife on the guard, right? But he sticks the point of his knife in the guard's ear. And what does the guard do? Rather than peeing his pants and saying, take whatever you want, and break down crying, which is what, frankly, I would do, well, the guard starts arguing with the thief about the nature of art. So that's a surprise right there. That's a lot of fun. Well, maybe not a lot of fun, but it is surprising, and it is funny. But don't worry, the thief says. We're both on the same side. Now, the second surprise, the thief manages to get up into one specific picture, right? And starts playing the harpsichord. This is quite a talented thief, right? He has a PhD, and obviously one of the lessons of the poem is don't trust anyone with a PhD. But he's playing this particular song, a G minor sonata by Domenico Scarlatti. This is Scarlatti composed very ornamental music, I think it's beautiful music, and here we get a small detail about this girl writing a letter, that this once made her heart beat till it passed the harpsichord and raced ahead and waited for the music to catch up. So she's someone with a heart that's geared towards music. Another surprise, she's been working on this letter for 320 years, right? And now here's another surprise, right? Her heart is with this thief. Like, this is enough to woo her. And the other surprise is that she agrees to help him, right? She comes alive and agrees to help him rob this museum, tape the guard's mouth. And then we have some interesting examples of repetition here. Is the girl writing a letter? It's the girl writing a letter, but for the girl writing a letter, these things don't matter. So she doesn't even have a name, right? Her name has been lost to the centuries. And so we have a few cases of repetition. We have some very specific description here. We have a brief shift into her perspective, right? Though he's dressed in some weird clothes. He's playing the harpsichord for her alone. And we deal with the guard. So I was kind of glad to hear that the guard wasn't killed or anything like that. Just has another strip of duct tape over his mouth. So any lines that jump out to you, any pieces of description, any surprises in the poem, right? The fact that, yeah, she goes with him and helps him and takes off with him certainly a surprise. Okay, then finally, I'm going to ask you just to give the poem some thought. So, does the poem raise any additional questions? Does it explicitly ask any questions or make any observations about anything in the world, human nature, art, etc., right? So is it doing this explicitly or is it doing it implicitly? Okay, and here I'm asking you to read it carefully and think about, well, what else might these observations or questions apply to? Or just simply, what else does this remind me of from my own life? Okay, and this can be a tangential connection, but something from memory or something you read. Why is that interesting to me? Well, one, I mean, simply your lives are interesting to me and valuable. You know, I'm always trying to further connect with my students. But two, we're moving from this assignment into the narrative suite, right? Where you will be telling stories and using narrative to make your points. All right, so we read 7 different articles on the importance of narrative in the business world, okay, and how that connects you with your audience. Now we're reading examples of beautifully written, and well, I mean, there is some ugliness in Fairchild's poetry, but the ugliness seems to have a shine, right? But very descriptive narratives, and we're reflecting upon those, and then we're going to be moving to writing our own narratives in order to connect with the professionals who will be reading your grad school applications. All right, so this was laid out very, very carefully. All right. So in terms of larger questions, well, one is just simply, what is the nature of art, right? Art is for pleasure, not possession, is one theory, right? We don't really have a, I don't know, an alternative definition here or a theory of aesthetics or anything like that, but that's certainly one of them. The second is that, you might not know this, but the Gardner Museum was actually robbed a few years after this poem was published. And you can still go there and see the empty frames where the thief or thieves cut those paintings out. And if art, I mean, I don't know what art means to you, but I think it, at its best, reveals something about human nature. I think those empty frames count as art. I mean, I think they reveal something about human nature, right? That we have an unpleasant, ugly, greedy side. And there is a real sense of being connected with one specific historical event by looking on those frames and being essentially immersed in a specific kind of absence, right? No one knows where they are. Okay, so in terms of other questions, well, here's one. Okay, how does the thief know to play the G minor sonata? We have almost zero biographical information about the women that Vermeer painted, okay? Best guess, we have a few possible identities, but we know next to nothing about who those women were or their daily lives or what they you know, enjoyed or you know, their likes and loves and what annoyed them, etc. So the thief has a PhD, yes, but this particular piece of knowledge does not appear in any book, right? And so I think the poem is also perhaps implicitly asking us, well, just how does he know, right? That question is there. And I think one possible answer is, well, this thief has studied this painting. He has given this painting a quality of attention, and a writer named Simone Weil once described once described pure attention as a kind of prayer. All right, it's you think of it as a gateway to the sacred. And so, to my mind, one possible answer is that he has just studied this painting so much that he might love this woman. He might be a con man who is, using her, of course. But he made a guess, and that guess was an absolute bullseye. And he was able to make that guess simply because of how carefully he studied this painting, that he connected with her on some level, that on some level he knew her, as well as she knew herself, right? And maybe he learned to play the harpsichord just for this event. I don't know. And then I think another, excuse me, another possible question, right? Another bigger question in terms of life. The thief hands her the knife and says, "You slice the paintings out of their frames, you roll them up." And she does it, right? She tapes the guard. She helps him get the paintings out in the van. She jumps. I mean, how does she know how to drive? I don't know. But the thief puts her behind the wheel, right? That seems like a bit of a leap of faith, but he evidently trusts her to figure out to drive, immediately. So one question is, well, why does she do it, right? And I think the one answer is that this thief has granted her life, right? In that sense that she's real, A, and B, she's in love. So I think the poem answers that, but I think the poem's also asking us, the reader, well, what would you do for love? I think that question is implicit in this final passage of the poem. What would you do for love? And of course, that is a question that all of us have to answer at some point, right? I don't know that, if my wife Chelsea was like, "Hey, let's go rob a bank or let's go rob a museum," I feel like I'd probably dissuade her from that. But I think that question is there. I think it's asking us. Okay, so those are the thanks for bearing with me. Those are the three kind of parts of that assignment. All right, of the close read assignment. So essentially what I'm going to have you do is just type it up as a Word doc, and I'm just going to have you post that to a Blackboard discussion so that I can read all of your responses. When you turn in your narrative suite, you'll turn in your close read, your narrative suite, and then 3 prompts that are on the schedule that I'm about to send you as well. All right, so I'm still waiting to hear from, let's see, 4 people. So please let me know what time during the week is good for you to meet with your small group. All right, holler at me with any questions. Thanks very much. I've emailed you the assignments and I will post them here to Blackboard shortly. Thanks, y'all. Looking forward to meeting you. Cheers.